I'm going to give you a quick introduction to Adobe Draw. Now, Adobe Draw, it's a free iPad app, but it works really well with the cloud. And so what I'm using, I've got an iPad Pro here, I've got an Apple Pencil, and I'm going to be using Adobe Draw to just quickly mock up a character. Now, I'm not much of an artist, so I'm just going to talk about how you can do this. Don't expect great artwork in the process. Now, before I get into it, one thing it might be worthwhile pointing out is Adobe have announced they're going to be moving Adobe Photoshop to the iPad, and that may make Adobe Draw completely obsolete, but it's not due out till next year, so it could be still a year away, so I'm just sharing Adobe Draw because I think it's a lot of fun right now. It's simple, and you don't have to use an eraser if you make a mistake, so it's pretty cool. So here's Adobe Draw. I was just messing around. So what you can do, I've got a number of different projects. I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to pick a format. I try and pick something with fairly high resolution because you want good resolution for the artwork later on. So I've just picked a 36 by 100 by 3600. How it works is down the right hand side, we've got a number of layers. We can put layer upon layer upon layer, and they really just turn into layers in Photoshop, but there's no hierarchy, which is a bummer. What you basically have to do is once you finish drawing, you export across to either Illustrator or Photoshop, and then you have to create the structure, the hierarchy of the true puppet over there, and you can't bring the file back afterwards. So it's a one-way push, but given those restrictions, it's still quite useful. Yep, so just make sure it's still recording. On the left-hand side over here, we've got all our different brushes, and if you can tap on a brush and bring up the size of the dot, the opacity, you just tap and drag up and down, it changes the opacity. You can tap and pick a color, there's palettes, there's a color picker selection, but what I find particularly useful is you can actually, if you drag, and if you had a picture over here, you can actually sample straight off the picture. There are also settings. You can change the, let's put the color, oops, put the color back to black. You can change like the roundness of the line. If it's not round, you can change the angle and so forth, and how much it tapers at the ends. So you got a number of things. It's also checks how hard you're pressing with the pen, which is useful. So it's the dynamic pressure and the velocity. So the speed you draw makes a difference. And that's particularly useful. Let's reset the brush. When you get into some of the brushes. So for example, if I've got this sort of a brush, if I make it a bit big, if I draw it slowly, it's thin at the ends. Now if I press while in the middle of the drawing and then gently, so I can control while I'm drawing how thick it is. But I can also, if I draw fast, it makes a difference. And so you can get a little bit more control and a bit more life out of it. There are also undo buttons, which are great. You can drop in shapes. You can make the layer menu go away and a few things like that. Up here is when you click to actually share to Illustrator or Photoshop, and it just opens. It's magic. When you tap one of these, you've got these running on the desktop, the file just opens automatically. You're just giving it a copy. So there's a number of other things. I'm not going to go through all the features. Anything in settings? No. So you can add grids and you've got some controls, but I very rarely go into there. So cool. So that's the basics of the app mechanics, and that's about it. There's only so many things to it. The number of layers over here on the right is, I think, depends on the device you're on. I think with my iPad Pro, it gets to about 22 layers, which is not enough to do a character animator puppet. So what I often do is do part of the drawing here, and I'll show you some techniques to keep the layers under control. And I think that's enough for the first one. I think just to give you that introduction to how the number of the features, and the next episode we'll start getting into and actually trying to use something. So for example, one of the things I'm going to show is an image layer. I'm going to pick up an image, and load that up as a background. Cool, but we'll leave that until next time.